Hello, this is the story of Lazarus. We're reading John chapter 11. Now a man named Lazarus was sick. He was from Bethany, the village of Mary and her sister Martha. This Mary, whose brother Lazarus now lay sick, was the same one who poured perfume on the Lord and wiped his feet with her hair. So the sisters sent word to Jesus, "Lord, the one you love is sick." When he heard this, Jesus said, "This sickness will not end in death. No, it is for God's glory, so that God's Son may be glorified through it." Jesus loved Martha and her sister and Lazarus. Yet when he heard that Lazarus was sick, he stayed where he was 2 more days. If Jesus had anyone that would be considered best friends, it was Mary, Martha, and Lazarus. I have no doubt that he wanted to go see Lazarus immediately, but there was something more important than his own comfort. He needed the world to know who he is. And he did it by challenging the tradition of the day. The Jews had this thing called Ben Kafra. Basically, the spirit would hover over the body for 3 days, then leave after that. Jesus wanted to wait till the 4th day to raise Lazarus, because then it was like all hope was lost. Then he said to his disciples, "Let us go back to Judea." "But Rabbi," they said, "a short while ago the Jews tried to stone you, and yet you are going back there?" Jesus answered, "Are there not 12 hours of daylight? A man who walks by day will not stumble, for he sees by this world's light. It is when he walks by night that he stumbles, for he has no light." Jesus says that God will give us time for what he needs us to do. Us trying to do something without him will lead to disaster, but that might not mean he doesn't want us to do it. He just knows when it is best. After he had said this, he went on to tell them, "Our friend Lazarus has fallen asleep, but I am going there to wake him up." His disciples replied, "Lord, if he sleeps, he will get better." Jesus had been speaking out of his death, but his disciples thought he meant natural sleep. So then he told them plainly, "Lazarus is dead, and for your sake I am glad I was not there, so that you may believe. But let us go to him." Then Thomas, called Didymus, said to the rest of the disciples, "Let us also go, that we may die with him." That's kind of a movie cliche, isn't it? It's kind of like,
"I thought I'd die fighting side by side with an elf."
What about side by side with a friend?
I could do that.
there was a real danger in going to Judea, but that was kind of the reason that Jesus needed to go in the first place. He had to do one last thing that would secure his death, and he wanted every disciple to see what he could do. There just isn't a bigger miracle than coming back from the dead. He had to foreshadow that he was capable of it. On his arrival, Jesus found that Lazarus had already been in the tomb for 4 days. Bethany was less than 2 miles from Jerusalem, and many Jews had come to Martha and Mary to comfort them in the loss of their brother. When Martha heard that Jesus was coming, she went out to meet him, but Mary stayed at home. "Lord," Martha said to Jesus, "if you had been here, my brother would not have died, but I know that even now God will give you whatever you ask." The 4 days is mentioned, like I said earlier, and it's assumed that there was a crowd because mourning was a big thing in those days, and there wasn't a single hopeful person there except for Mary and Martha. And there is only need for hope when there's not a snowball's chance in hell that it can be better. So they weren't hopeful and joyful, they were hopeful and utterly depressed. But they knew that Jesus could do anything. Jesus said to her, "Your brother will rise again." Martha answered, "I know he will rise again in the resurrection at the last day." Jesus said to her, "I am the resurrection and the life. He who believes in me will live, even though he dies, and whoever lives and believes in me will never die. Do you believe this?" "Yes, Lord," she told him. "I believe that you are the Christ, the Son of God, who was to come into the world." Jesus didn't claim that he had resurrection power. He claimed he was the resurrection, and that through him you will have eternal life. And Martha believed. Enough said. And after she had said this, she went back and called her sister Mary aside. "The teacher is here," she said, "and is asking for you." When Mary heard this, she got up quickly and went to him. Now Jesus had not yet entered the village, but was still at the place where Martha had met him. When the Jews who had been with Mary in the house, comforting her, noticed how quickly she got up and went out, they followed her, supposing she was going to the tomb to mourn there. When Mary reached the place where Jesus was and saw him, she fell at his feet and said, "Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died." When Jesus saw her weeping, and the Jews had come along with her also weeping, he was deeply moved in the spirit and troubled. "Where have you laid him?" he asked. "Come and see, Lord," they replied. Jesus wept. There it is, the shortest verse in the Bible. But fun thing aside, Jesus was hurt by this. And I think that this says something important about God. God isn't telling us to tough it out because it will be better soon. He mourns with us. He knew he was going to resurrect Lazarus. From a logical perspective, he had no reason to be sad. But this still saddened him greatly. And so God is not ignorant. He feels things with us. But also, most scholars say that Jesus' tone was a little bit of anger. He was angry that this harsh world took his friend away, and that evil has given us reasons to cry. So it's okay to be angry at evil, because Jesus was too. Then the Jews said, "See how he loved him?" But some of them said, "Could not he who opened the eyes of a blind man have kept this man from dying?" Maybe this was mockery, but I think it could also just be confusion. We believe that God is all-powerful, but we just sometimes ask, why couldn't he do this? And that's kind of a question that often doesn't get answered. But this story can teach us something. Jesus didn't do a miracle because he was going to do an even bigger miracle. Jesus, once more deeply moved, came to the tomb. It was a cave with a stone laid across the entrance. "Take away the stone," he said. "But Lord," said Martha, the sister of the dead man, "by this time there's a bad odor, for he has been there 4 days." Then Jesus said, "Did I not tell you that if you believe, you would see the glory of God?" There's something in that, because they could see the miracle and been like, "That's so cool." But if they have faith, then they see God's awesomeness. So they took away the stone. Then Jesus looked up and said, "Father, I thank you that you have heard me. I knew that you always hear me, but I say this for the benefit of the people standing here, that they may believe that you sent me." When he had said this, Jesus called in a loud voice, "Lazarus, come out!" The dead man came out. His hands and feet were wrapped with strips of linen and cloth around his face. Jesus said to them, "Take off the grave clothes and let him go." This helps us realize that Jesus always only did what the Father wanted him to do. I do believe that if the Father did not want to raise Lazarus, Jesus could not raise him, but that would never happen because Jesus always knew the Father's will. That's why he never tried to do a miracle and go, "Well, that didn't work." He always hears the Father and the Father hears him. Their bond was something special, the most special. And so, of course, Lazarus was raised from the dead. I imagine there would be a good amount of suspense and fear, really. Seeing a body come out of a tomb would probably make me lose my bowels or something. But they took the grave clothes off and saw that it was Lazarus. And there were many reactions to this. I want to cover the negative reactions next week. And there's only one verse for the happy reactions, so let's read that. "Therefore, many of the Jews who had come to visit Mary and had seen what Jesus did put their faith in him." So remember that. See what God has done and recognize that it is him. Thank you.